Hello everyone and welcome to this week's video. This week we're going to be talking about impact, and impact is a really interesting one. Both BugCrowd, HackerOne, Integrity will all ask you to explain your impact. And the reason why is because impact primarily dictates how a client or a triager is going to handle your vulnerability and how they're going to rate it in severity. Now, impact is poorly explained. It's often explained as just what an attacker could do with a vulnerability. So this week we're going to look at that with the help of our sponsor, Flare.io. So what is Flare? Flare is this really cool product which essentially allows companies to search the dark web, but not just the dark web, also hub and source code, pastebin and leaks, Telegram chats, logs from different info stealers, and essentially a company can sign up, set a few domains for alerts. You can imagine like a big company would have quite a few domains, maybe different brands their security team looks after. And then it will actually send them daily alerts of whether or not something new has popped up on the dark web. So let's say some RDP access has just popped up where somebody is claiming to have RDP access into their systems. They can see that post go live, and then within a few days they can start to remediate that much quicker than if they were just waiting for someone to actually purchase that and find out. It allows them to cut it off at its core, and it also allows you to explore this content without necessarily installing like something like Tor and going into a .onion link, which is very difficult even as a security team to convince your employer to let you do. So it's super helpful for security teams, and we'll have a look at how it works a bit more in a moment. So what is impact? So impact is fundamentally what an attacker can do with a vulnerability. Even a really basic technical bug can be a critical bug with the right impact, and that goes the other way. Even a bug that's super complex, super cool, can be low severity or actually NA because it doesn't have any impact. It's really what determines the severity far more than any scoring systems or anything like that. It is impact that is key. And it is the thing clients care about over literally everything else. If you want a client to listen to you, maybe they're ignoring you, maybe you're not happy, you're arguing with them, this is how you get them to listen. This is how you convince them to give you a higher bounty. And I will be honest, it's not worth arguing over low impact vulnerabilities, and you're better off spending your time moving on and going to something that's more high impact that you don't have to constantly argue to try and get someone to listen to you about. A lot of the time when I see newbie bug hunters, they'll find a bug, and obviously for them it really matters. It's one of their first bugs they found, and they will sit there and argue with a client because it's a low severity and they think it shouldn't be a low severity. And all the time they spent arguing could have been going out there and finding a higher severity vulnerability, which has real impact. Now, you might be familiar with CVSS scoring as a way to talk about impact. CVSS takes all these different attributes about a vulnerability and turns it into a score from 0 to 10, 0 being the least impactful and 10 being the most impactful. And the way it does it is it uses these different variables that ask some questions about the attack. Do you need physical access to the device, or can you do it over the internet? Is it an attack that anyone can carry out, or is it a really technical attack? Does it require you to already have access, or can you do it by just self-registering? Does it require the victim to interact with something at all, or can you do it without any interaction? Can you access something you didn't have access before, i.e. using something like an SSRF to pivot from a web server into the internal network? So is the scope changed or is it unchanged? And then we have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And all of these come together, they mash together and make a number. And that number claims to represent the impact of that vulnerability. Realistically, it's flawed like everything is. How do we actually know what an attacker can do with a bug, and how do we know what's valuable? Let's actually take a look at some dark web marketplaces and see what is actually being bought and sold. So I'm going to start off with showing you how Flare works and how we can actually do this, and then I'll show you some samples and we can talk about kind of tips going forwards. So let's start out with how do we use Flare. Okay, so I've got Flare's dashboard up at the moment. And as you can see, this is currently connected to insiderphd.dev, which is my website. And this is comparing me to everything in their database. This is what global means. And you can see that I'm doing pretty well for my one-page HTML website that has zero interactivity because I was worried I'd get hacked. And you can see this is like how well it's doing over time. You can see here, I've done very well this week. I don't know what I've done, but I've done very well. And this is what I mean when I say these recent events and stuff like that. So if you go to the events, it will start off in the tenant. It will show you how your identifiers are being found. So here you can see that this person has included me on a GitHub list. Another one where I've been included on a GitHub list. My whois data for my website, which is all redacted for privacy. And again, more stuff that's on people's GitHub profiles. So for me, it's not that interesting, but you can imagine if you're an actual company that has actual assets to defend, where you might have 50 different websites, 50 different domain names, maybe 4 different brands. Keeping track of it all can be really difficult. Every day it sends you like a little email that says there was something found. So for me, it usually says there's nothing found. So we can also reduce the severity here and only show the most impactful events. So for me, that's nothing. But what we're going to be looking at the moment is going into this one here and changing from tenant, you can see here some of the subdomains that's on my website, into global. And global lets us search their entire database for basically anything. So let's look up info stealer. So you can see this shows you the volume of events and shows you which actors on different forums are the most common and what the most active sources are. You might say, okay, these are all like GitHub. There's not really the dark web. So in here, in the filters, you can actually choose what you want to have visible. So we can actually just remove the open web entirely, like this. And then it will only show us results from the dark web. And then if we have a look here, this shows us our individual thing. Here you can see this is from Telegram, so this is a Telegram chat. And you can see the context of the message. You can also get the full context and see the messages that are posted before and afterwards. So here you can see the AI assist functionality, which basically summarizes it. So the motives, the industries targeting, the companies targeting, TTPs, some details, as well as remediation guidance and translation. So the motives are really what we're interested in here. And what we can see when we start to have a look at quite a lot of the data here is essentially what attackers actually care about. So that's like a brief introduction to how Flare works. So what are the kinds of impacts that we see people actually trying to buy and sell? So the first is infrastructure. There is quite a lot of buying and selling of infrastructure, for example, text messages, proxies, VPNs, VPSs, etc. So if you have a vulnerability that allows you to impact some kind of like infrastructure, whether that's being able to send messages without text messages without any kind of maybe it's not calculating the price properly. Those are the kinds of things that will be targeted for this kind of wider infrastructure that they need. Similar as well, anything where you can get access to servers or processing without providing a card or being able to bypass the purchase of things. That is also very valuable in kind of the buying and selling of infrastructure. The next one we have is pure malware. So this is code that has been written that is now being resold as a Trojan, basically. And depending on which kind of things, so some will be things like webcam related, turning on a webcam. Some will be getting remote access. Some will be very traditional like rats and rootkits. Other ones will be more keylogger-esque, and the price of them is dependent on how good they are, and essentially how much functionality they offer. So, for example, this Trojan rat with a cryptor is $550. And you can imagine if you're, say, hacking maybe something like an antivirus or something very similar, being able to bypass that security detection is extremely valuable for attackers, because that means they can sell what might be, just a few lines of code as like a full product, and especially having them being undetectable aspects. On the other side, more traditional kind of things like keyloggers, where they're not necessarily as trying to bypass anything. Yeah, it's a bit less. What we also see, combining the malware and infrastructure, is malware that reports back to things like Discord, where people will be selling the infrastructure and the tools that kind of connect these two pieces together as well. So if you are hacking something that can be hijacked into a monitoring solution, used to be IRC, nowadays it's Discord, that can be really helpful for attackers. Phishing as well, we also see a lot of the buying and selling of phishing pages. And again, it's not necessarily something that would be rewardable in a bug bounty context, phishing really, but it can be helpful if you've got something like an open redirect, potentially, where you can get someone to visit a phishing website. It might be worth mentioning that as part of the impact. PII, so probably one of the most common vulnerabilities is information disclosure, and what that information disclose, it really depends. I have a full video on information disclosure type vulnerabilities, you want to watch that. This information, being able to look up people's information, specifically social security numbers, date of birth, addresses, zips, names, etc., all really help, or all really can be sold on the dark web, usually in quite large amounts. But there are also services that offer to find this information out for you as well, and that's a bit more pricey. So if you do want to, like, let's say you're putting your evil hat on, if you do want to look at PII of an individual, you can pay for one of these services, or you can bulk buy a massive collection of data. Then we have finance/cards. Obviously, working debit and credit card details are sold very often for very cheap with very high limits because of the risk of actually committing fraud. Another thing we see a lot of is gift cards. So gift cards being sold as well. So you can see here that an Amazon $100 gift card sells for $28. And again, that's usually because the fraud will be detected and they'll get caught usually. But super helpful to see how, especially even gift cards, can be really valuable on the dark web and can be bought and sold. And things to keep in mind from a bug bounty context, for gift cards, being able to have a race condition on a gift card, that would be super helpful. To be able to, maybe it's got no rate limit on the gift card activator, you can just keep on spamming different gift cards until one works. Or being able to buy, say, an Amazon gift card on a third-party website, and there might be some business logic there where maybe the third-party website allows you to complete surveys, and then surveys, do enough of them, you get gift cards. Can you bypass the completing of services and just grab the gift card? There's also a vulnerability market, though it's not huge. A lot of the vulnerabilities, or a lot of the buying and selling, tends to be more buying and selling individual accounts rather than the vulnerabilities that lets people take over that account. So actually with vulnerabilities, you don't see a lot of buying and selling of them, but again, you do see that. This is an RDP vulnerability exploit. There are plenty of tutorials on using things like Metasploit, and there are quite a few other different POCs. Again, this is probably most comparable to a typical bug bounty situation where someone could buy and sell a vulnerability alone. However, we don't see that as much as we do the output. So your buying and selling of cards, buying and selling of individual accounts, PII data dumps, etc. We see account takeovers, so this is usually in the form of info stealer logs, and you can see there are a bunch of names, a bunch of domain names, and then a bunch of passwords. And a lot of the time they will buy and sell these as well. $15 for a collection of username, password, email, and then this also includes their credit card last four numbers as well. A lot of account takeover types, usually username and passwords, usually through phishing, also do get bought and sold. How do we actually look this up on Flare, and how can you take a look for yourselves? We're back into Flare. How do we actually start to look for these? Make sure the severity is on the higher severity stuff. Medium tends to have things like GitHub pastes. And then we just look up what we want. Maybe we look for XSS type vulnerabilities, and we can see some of these are not going to be very helpful. So some of these are like file listings for Lockbit, which is a ransomware group. Some of them are, again, file listings rather than anything else. So we can look specifically for Marketplace, and then we can see, okay, this person is selling something called Invicti Standard latest release. And again, we can look at the context and have a look, but this looks like a piece of software that's probably been cracked, I would guess. And we might be looking for things like SQL injection, and we can see this is people buying and selling hacking software itself. So this one is $9. And again, you can go into content and get like a full understanding. This is a Windows botnet that has a nice PHP panel built in. And you can see these get bought and sold quite a lot. There's a lot of these best hacking tools mega pack where a bunch of different tools will be included together. One thing that's also really helpful to look at is going into the chats and looking at the Telegram chats. So some of these are going to be this one, which is CVE Notify. So this is just going to be something that sends CVE alerts. But if you keep on scrolling and digging into these, we can see this one is advertising a vulnerability checklist. And we can keep on having a look here. This is a POC for a command injection. And again, we can go into content, get the full context. In this case, we can also see the attachments here, and there's quite a lot of like additional information and discussion. So the Telegram can be really helpful. This one seems to be a random chat room. This person found an SQL error-based vulnerability, but then when you actually read into them, who wants to sell a site? This is what I mean when I say people won't sell the vulnerability. They sell the data that comes out of it. Hopefully you found that looking at Flare really interesting. The link to check them out is down below for you to see if it's something you want to check out as well. So let's go back to impact. So what does a good impact statement look like? So I've collected 3 reports that I think deliver impact really well. So this first report has 3 different impacts, and each one is very clearly labeled. The actual discussion is really short. For more information, they provide like screenshots and videos, but actually for the impact, it is very short. But they explore that full impact of the vulnerability, not just stopping at one, but showing how you can use it in multiple different ways. We've got this one here. Again, this is super short, gets the point across. It's not over dramatic, it's not overhyped, it's really clear and easy to understand. The ability to confirm an arbitrary email on the domain name and leverage a single sign-on to set a master password for all the stores under the same password. So again, short, not dramatic, not overhyped, really easy to understand. And finally, we have this vulnerability. This has to go deep into the product to really explain the impact. Like, they have to really understand both you and the client. And that's not necessarily always the case. The client really understands what they're actually looking at. They go really deep into the product. They don't assume the triager knows or assume that the client knows. They have this like backwards and forwards discussion rather than like arguments with the triager. It's a lot more productive. It really shows what you can do with a single vulnerability. So my tips for explaining impact: 1, don't over-exaggerate the impact, let the vulnerability speak for itself, but do make sure you fully understand what you can do with it and what an attacker can do with it as well. We saw, looking at chats where people are sharing they found an SQL injection, they're saying, who wants to sell his site? So they're not selling the vulnerability, they're selling what results from that, the actual data. And when I say make sure you fully understand what you can do with it, really dive into the product and see if you can understand the impact from multiple different ways, and also take it as far as you can. So if you found an IDOR and maybe it uses UUIDs, see if there's a way you can find those UUIDs in an iteratable way, rather than just reporting it as a UUID, because that is how you can get much bigger impact. Consider the industry the client works in. If they work in something like healthcare, they have additional regulations about how they have to handle data above and beyond what you might see on any other vulnerability or any other industry. Don't assume the triager or even the client knows every system. Triagers are often there to essentially give something a score and tell a client when they should come back to this. And a client will be like on the security team for an entire organization. They're probably not going to know, especially for a big organization, every system they have access to. And I have seen situations where hackers have had to demonstrate to a client that they actually own an asset. And finally, take the attack as far as you reasonably can, but don't actually commit actual hacking. So don't download data. Don't try and affect regular users. Show what an attacker could do, and then don't do that, essentially. And in terms of actually explaining impact, short statements. Don't overhype it. Don't go into it. Really does just need a sentence or two, or just a few bullet points. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching, and thank you very much to Flare for sponsoring this video and giving me access to their tool. If you are somebody who works on a security team for a large organization who does need to access the dark web and try and understand what their employee's risk profile is, I really do recommend you check it out. Very cool product, very cool team to work with. But thank you very much, everyone. I will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.